Welcome to Election Night with the Black Press of America. Election night certainly has arrived, and just about anything is still possible. Everything from a Democratic hold in the Senate and a fairly close race for the House to something like a Republican rout is well within the range of realistic possibilities. Why such a wide range? Well, with so many races on edge, it wouldn't take much for the final outcome to feel very good or very bad for either party. In the Senate, the races likeliest to decide control remain exceptionally close according to all of the polls. Um, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and even New Hampshire, with just a few breaks here and there, either party can win control. There's a similar story in the House of Representatives. While Republicans are plainly favored to win the chamber, dozens of races are still toss-ups. It wouldn't take much for Democrats also to keep the race fairly close, perhaps delaying a call on House control for many hours or perhaps even days. On the other hand, it wouldn't take much for Republicans to pick up dozens of seats, leaving the impression that 2022 was something like a red wave. There's also the possibility, as we go on with the possibilities, of more surprising outcomes, a true Republican landslide or a Democratic hold on Congress. The polls have been wrong before. The voters, after all, have the final say. Tonight, the Black Press of America's special election night coverage begins with none other than Lauren Burke, the Capitol Hill reporter extraordinaire. Hey, Lauren, how are you?
How you doing, Stacey? How's it going?
Doing great. We're what a night in store. Dr. Chavis is going to join us momentarily. We're going to get reports from James Wright of the Washington Informer throughout the night. In a few moments, the Kingmaker himself, South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, will join us as well. Michael Blake, the CEO of Atlas Strategy Group and former DNC Vice Chair and New York Assemblyman, will join us as well. Melanie Campbell is going to join us. Brandon Jessup from State Voices, and of course, some publishers of the Black Press: John Warren, James Washington, Al McFarland, and others. Rashonda Tate Billingsley out in Texas, and Perry Busby in Florida will also join us. But Lauren, how things are shaken out. We keep hearing different things about the polls, but where are we right now?
You know what? I really think that we probably should just wait for the results. I mean, I do. You can see that CNN, everybody's doing their exit polling, and I think that's very interesting. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the results, the real results from real voters. And we've seen some errors in polling before, including exit polls. It was interesting that some of the issues, had a little talk with Ron Lester, a great pollster out there who's working a few campaigns. He had talked about what he had heard that was on the minds of voters. You know, what were their top three issues? And of course, it was what you would expected it to be.
Yep.
It was the economy. It was the bread and butter issues of gas prices and grocery prices. It was crime was the thing that came up, and the issue of saving our democracy was the thing that came up. But I'm a big believer in just waiting for the results, and I am also a big believer though in seeing things up close. And I did travel to Virginia Beach and to Abigail Spanberg's district here in Virginia, which is Prince William County. And we get Leader Clyburn on the day that he showed up. I was there. I talked to him a little bit about that. But those two races, of course, will I think be an indicator of how the night is going to go for the U.S. House of Representatives. And I do think that in the case of Elaine Luria's seat, the second district of Virginia, that was more of a redistricting mess up by the Democrats than it is anything that Elaine Luria did. She ran a very energetic campaign against the Republican State Senator Jen Kiggans. But the fact that Kevin McCarthy will be with Jen Kiggans tonight in Virginia Beach is an indicator that they think that they're definitely going to win that. I actually
Yeah.
think the Spanberger seat is probably more of an indication of what will happen tonight. But just generally and globally, uh, you can see that there's sort of a lot of fear going on the Democratic side, a lot of worry
Oh
that they're
yeah.
going to lose, worry that they're going to lose the House. And that I think that is a legitimate worry, to say the least, from a historic standpoint. As you know, that's generally what happens in the second year of the presidency of the second year for the presidency of the party that's not in the White House is always a bad year. That alone is a trending problem.
Right.
But we'll see. As you know, we'll see from the results tonight as we're on the air.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, let's bring Dr. Benjamin Chavis in, the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Let's also bring in James Wright as well. James is monitoring some things. He's in Washington. Dr. Chavis is in Washington right now. We're going to have folks in various places tonight. But Dr. Chavis, I know there are some concerns about exit polling on your part. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Well, thank you very much, and thank Lauren, and thank James, and thank you, Stacy. This is the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. This is a very important election night, and I just want to salute all of our brothers and sisters from all over America who have already voted. You know, the polls are still open in some states. So, for those states who are still voting, we encourage you to go out and vote. Voting for Black America is not only a responsibility, but it's a sacred right that's blood soaked. But in terms of the exit polling, the early exit polling is just that, it's early. And I think a lot of times these polls, Stacey, don't adequately cover the African American community or other communities of color. And so I'm concerned that all these predictions that are based on early polling may not, in fact, be accurate. I agree with Lauren that we should all wait before passing judgment on the election. People are still voting in other parts of the country because of the time zones. But let me just say that in this region where I am now in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, I'm so pleased that it looks like Maryland's going to get its first Black governor and first Black attorney general statewide elections. That's a positive. And the national media doesn't focus on some of these races. And I think that African American votes, both male and female, and young voters, are making a critical difference in some of these swing states and some of these battleground states that have been identified. So I don't want Black people to get discouraged. It's early in the first hours of the midterm elections. We'll get more data later on, but I think it's good for us to have this program at this time, at this hour, Stacy, to give people an opportunity to hear some perspectives, get some data, and also serve as a reassurance that our votes do count. Our votes do have a purpose. We do have an interest, a political interest, an economic interest, a social justice interest in the outcome of this election. And of course, Jim Clyburn will be on in a few minutes. We would love to hear from him, his perspective as one of the leaders of the Democratic Party on the House side. And certainly he can give some fresh data of how he sees the election for tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a little bit in a little while, we're going to talk about the many African American candidates who are seeking office nationwide. We'll talk about that as well. But we're going to bring James right in. James, I know James is a historian, as we all know. And Lauren brought up about the what happens historically during midterms, or what seems to happen historically during midterm elections. James, I know you have some comparisons that date back perhaps 30 years or so. Talk about the midterms in terms of what shakes out historically.
Well, the most powerful midterm that happened was in 1974 after the Nixon Watergate scandal. A huge number of Democratic freshmen entered the House of Representatives. And while the House of Representatives was under no threat in terms of Republicans of taking over, that huge number held on for like decades in terms of keeping the House fairly a democratic institution. In 1982, when Ronald Reagan was president, the Republicans lost a number of seats, even though Reagan was popular, because if you recall, there was a really bad recession at that time. So the voters, while they didn't take it out on Ronald Reagan because
I think we lost your volume there, James. James is about to break down some history for us, but he got frozen there. So we'll come back to James in a bit. But it's interesting. He mentioned, Lauren, the midterm after Nixon. It was only, what, a couple of years before that, the Congressional Black Caucus was formed.
Right, exactly. John Conyers, the historic late John Conyers, and only 13 members at the time. And now the caucus is a historic number over 50. It's interesting to think about the Black Caucus in this moment, because one of the things that would happen if the House, if the Republicans have the majority in the House, is that we lose 6 chairs. One was retiring. Eddie Bernice Johnson, was the chair of the Science Committee, was retiring. But one of the biggest losses in power that potentially can happen tonight, or if the House flips to the Republicans, is the loss of those chairmanships. We're talking millions of dollars being controlled by uh, 5 Black members of Congress, including on the Agriculture Committee, the Education Committee, and of course Maxine Waters at House Financial Services. That's just something to look at for tonight. That's a very big deal, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about the transfer of that power, and people think about the House, oftentimes throughout the year, we don't often think about what the House of Representatives is doing or how important the House of Representatives is.
Right.
And now you just broke down why.
Right. Well,
or
absolutely.
At least the reason why.
And a lot of times they do a lot. And of course, Leader Clyburn will sure talk about this a little bit, is that, they do a lot in the Senate. The Senate holds them up.
Yeah. Well, let's bring Dr. Chavez back, because Dr. Chavez is going to bring on a very special guest for us. Dr. Chavez, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And without further ado, I'm very honored and pleased to bring to the Black Press of America on this election day, this election night, the Honorable Jim Clyburn. He's a freedom-fighting member of Congress, one of the highest-ranking African Americans in the Congress of the United States, and he's led the charge. And I think that look at the progress that has been made over the last 2 years under Jim Clyburn's leadership, under Nancy Pelosi's leadership. So without further ado, Congressman Jim Clyburn, South Carolina.
Thank you, Dr. Chavez. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm sure you've got some questions. I'll try to answer them. But just let me say thank you so much for the contribution you and NNPA make to the overall political discussion. And we'll wait and see what happens tonight. I'm not going to make any predictions tonight. Yes. I will reflect upon what I've experienced while I was out there. I got back this time last week. I spent 9 consecutive days in 7 states. And I saw a lot of energy in all of those states. But it was in places where most media didn't attend. I was in Union Halls in Toledo, Ohio. I didn't see any media around. I was in fellowship halls, in churches in, I think it was Eastern Pennsylvania. No media were around. And the reporting that took place kept saying that Democrats are not carrying the proper message. They're talking about Roe v. Wade. Well, in none of those places did I hear any discussion about Roe v. Wade. I didn't talk about it. And it wasn't talking about it in these places. We were talking about what the Biden administration had delivered for these communities. And they were overwhelmingly pleased with the Rescue Act and with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, with the Science and the Chips and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act. I don't think I ever heard any media report on the fact that we had capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month in that legislation. And that got overwhelming support from people, but none of that's been reported. They keep reporting on what they want to report on, and that tends to influence people. And when people heard some of the stuff that we had done, some of them were hearing it for the first time. How many times do you hear people report, or the media reporting, that Kevin McCarthy and the leadership of the Republican Party said up front that if they get in charge, they're going to sunset Social Security, going to means test Medicare, going to get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to do what they can to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. If the media were reporting that, people would know it.
That's right.
So that's just the fact of the matter. And so it's a little frustrating. I can understand, as you know, I used to be in the media business,
Yes.
so I know a little bit about it. And I know you write the headlines to attract attention. And if most of the people you're talking to aren't interested in the cost of insulin, well, most of the people I talk to are.
Yes.
These kinds of things, and I don't know how to get around that. Well, we just got to do some work
Well,
going forward
Congressman,
because things are not good.
yeah, and Congressman, and you absolutely spelled it out what this administration has been able to do, and has largely gone unreported when it comes to the mainstream media. But at the same time, um, don't the administration, don't your party have a responsibility to go to the people who brought them to the dance? I mean, look, let's face it, Congressman, when Biden, the president, was running, came down to South Carolina, Dr. Chavis spoke with him, with all of the NMPA publishers were there, and a few hours later you endorsed him. His campaign before that was spiraling toward defeat. But the moment those things took place in South Carolina, it put him on, it righted the ship, and he rode that wave to the White House. Isn't there a responsibility or understanding anyway that you need the black press? And it seems like sometimes we forget that, don't we?
Well, as I said, I was in your business, and I can tell you, yeah, that's a fact. And that's the problem we've got. And you see, the problem we've got, I don't know, what I think has to happen is that we've got to get a way, that is the black press, to get the understanding that whatever these rating companies are, they do not rate the black community properly. They do not rate the kind of communications that take place in the black community. They don't know how, let's say, weekly black newspapers are distributed. The way they're distributed will not get measured by what's the name, Arbitron, or whoever these people are,
Right.
that do these ratings. In some kind of way, we've got to get the Democratic Party and the black press on the same page when it comes to this.
Yeah.
We're not on the same
absolutely.
page. I have these discussions with Roland Martin and others all the time. Dr. Chips and I have talked about this. I write every month a column for NNPA.
And we enjoy it.
Well, I tried to do that because I'm sensitive to the fact that I got something to say, and you all can get it to the places that need to go. How many other people in Congress, especially on the Democratic side, doing that?
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. And I guess another
it's
reason
been
why they
well
call you
received.
Kingmaker.
Your,
Doc,
your column has been well received, Congressman Clyburn.
And look, I think that's
great
right.
impact.
Let me give you an example, if I may. I remember the first time I went out to campaign in Omaha, Nebraska. When I first met Simone.
Yes. Simone Sanders.
Yeah. She's from Omaha. I'm
Yes.
out there in Omaha. I'm expecting, I don't know what I really expect, but I got out there and this big African American community. If my memory serves, there were 2 or 3 African American radio stations. Omaha, Nebraska.
Right, the Omaha Star newspapers.
Simone newspapers there.
Right, Simone's mother is the editor of the Omaha Star.
Absolutely,
the Omaha Star. Right.
I get to Indiana the other night, and the first person I see from the black press.
Yes.
And the lady said to me in Des Moines, Iowa, You need to be out here more. Okay, because when you say it, we can understand it.
Yes.
You know, I don't know how you get people to understand that. You know, everybody got roles to play. And my whole thing is, hopefully, before I leave the stage, we can get my party to understand that we have got to play our roles more effectively.
Yes.
If I can't be a good pitcher, maybe I can be a good outfielder. It's I don't know. I don't know why people think that you got to be an expert at everything, or you got to be the expert for anybody to talk to. There's just certain things certain people can do and other people can't.
Correct.
And I'll give you
Can I
another
ask a
good example
question?
we just had in the last couple of weeks. You cannot beat Joe Biden on policy. You look at the policies of this administration, you got to go all the way back to 1965 to find an administration that's been more productive. I just mentioned a few of these bills: the Rescue Act, the Infrastructure Bill, Science, the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the PAC Act, taking care of all the soldiers coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, the Safer Communities Act. All of these passed. You got to go back to 1965 to find anything more consequential for the African American community than you get here. Now, then it's come to articulating all of that in a way that African American communities will be inspired by it. That ain't Joe Biden.
Exactly.
Barack Obama might be able to do that. Yours truly might be able to do that. I do it. I think I do it pretty effectively. But that's what you got to do. You got to say that Joe Biden is a great policy guy. Obama needs to go out there and help us carry the message.
Leader Clyburn, I saw you the day that you were with Abigail Spanberg on October 25. You came to Dumfries, Virginia, and you did a really good job articulating the top issues that the party should be articulating. But I noticed with her, she's sort of running a campaign that is a little bit amorphous. It doesn't really target voters in the same way that you were speaking. I know that you're not, probably wanting to criticize Abigail Spanberger right now, but I'm saying I think that the party, the Democratic Party, one of the problems is when you have the big tent, unlike the Republicans who can just say crime and gas prices, crime and gas prices. They just say the same thing over and over. But the Democrats, the three things that one would think that they could have hit was the insulin prices, Social Security, the Republicans cutting Social Security, which is always what they talk about, and the record job growth that Biden and you guys did. So do you think that part of the problem with the Democratic Party is the tent is so big that everyone is got a different message out there on the trail? It's just hard when you have that big tent to boil it down to a few things, or do you think it's something else?
Well, I think you're right about that. I don't know if the big tent is the reason. No matter how big the tent, you've got to employ some discipline.
Yeah.
When it comes to messaging.
Right.
You can have a small tent without any discipline, and it's going to go awry. So having a big tent without any discipline, you're really going to go awry. But if you got discipline, no matter how small the tent or how big the tent, you are more apt to be successful. And I will say, there's not enough discipline in the Democratic Party. There's too much, who can get, even when we grade each other, how many hits did you get last week on social media? Right. My question is, that gets you a headline, as I always say, but it doesn't make much headway. And so I don't care. The people that I talk to, of course, I may be wrong about that. The polls are closed here in a few minutes, and I'll see the results, my results today. I have no idea what there will be. Well, no, I shouldn't lie. I have an idea what there will be. I don't know what there will be. But all I'm saying is the people that I interact with when I go out there talking about broadband in Allendale County or Hampton County, where I was 2 days ago, I'm not talking to them about no social media hits.
Right.
They aren't into that. They do want their homes and their schools to be connected to broadband. And if I carry a broadband message, they understand that. When I say to them that if these guys get in charge, they've already said that they want to privatize Social Security, and they've been paying in Social Security since they were 16 years old. And that's what I said to them. I understand in front of a group, and first thing I said, how many of y'all have been working since you were 16 years old? And 95% of them going to raise their hands. I said, well, now, I'm not going to ask you how old you are now, but you've been paying Social Security ever since that time. And if you got somebody that says that in 3 years or 5 years, we're going to sunset Social Security. And if you don't know what that means the sun will set on Social Security.
Exactly.
Is that what you want to vote for? That's what they're going to do.
So
I said to them, we're going to means test Medicare. And let me tell you what that means. That means you will only be able to collect Medicare if they think your income is not too high. They didn't ask you that when you were paying into it. They understand that. And that's the way I talk when I'm out there.
Yeah. Well,
when I tell them they're going to rescind, they've already told you,
right,
this Inflation Reduction Act, where we just said insulin, $35 a month, no more, if you're on Medicare. And if you re-elect us, we're going to do that for everybody. People understand that.
right.
Dr. Chavis?
But that's
Yes.
not what's done nationally.
So, Congressman Clyburn, we hear you loud and clear about the need for more discipline in the messaging, the national messaging. And certainly, we in the Black Press, we want to work with you. No matter what the outcome of the election, we'll still have to pursue the fight
Absolutely.
for voting rights. We still have to pursue the fight for justice, for equality, for equity. And so the question I wanted to ask you, you still have some days after this election, before January. What is your prediction of how the House still can react to the election with a disciplined message and with some disciplined accomplishments that will help improve the quality of life of people of color, particularly African Americans and others, who are hoping that this election will provide more solutions to the problems, and rather than taking the nation backwards, but hoping the nation to go forward.
Well, I'm hopeful that there are a lot of things on the table that we could get done. John R. Lewis Voting Rights and Advancement Act is still there, sitting over in the Senate. Yeah. We are going to do something on the Electoral College reform. That's a vehicle that could be used to attach the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act to. Will we be able to do that? I'm not sure we can do that unless we get those other two votes from the Senate, the other two Democratic votes in the Senate that we don't have now. I just don't know. I know what we're going to try to do. But if we lose the House and the Senate tonight, I don't think you will ever get the Voting Rights Act back. And, and let me just say this for your listeners. Look, this has happened before. I don't know why people keep thinking that these things cannot happen. I'm the 9th African American to serve in Congress from South Carolina. That surprises a lot of people when I say that out in the public. I had people look at me as strange when I said that out in Toledo, Ohio. I said, yes, before I got elected to Congress, there were 8 other African Americans from South Carolina. The problem is, there was 95 years between number 8 and number 9. because what is happening now happened back in the 1890s. That's exactly what happened in the 1890s. When you see a Supreme Court in the holdup, B. Shelby case getting rid of the Voting Rights Act. That's what happened with Plessy versus Ferguson.
Yes.
You know, so what makes us think that this will never happen again? It is happening all around us. You got a president, now ex-president, who came to office, and among the first things he said was, the press is the enemy of the people. He didn't say the white press. He said the press. That includes us, you.
Yes.
Enemy of the people. Is that not exactly what Hitler did?
Yeah, and you came under some fire for those remarks. And that's the other thing too. The free speech seems to be on the line too, because I read and heard what you said, that how it began in Germany.
Yeah.
And so are you concerned?
Well, that's the truth. That's the truth.
Yeah, and the congressman knows what I'm talking about. He came under some fire, right?
Yeah.
For those remarks. So these are the things, Congressman. When we talk about messaging, it seems that more and more the Democratic side of Republicans are doing and saying whatever they feel, whatever they want, regardless of decorum, right? It seems that Democrats are still on the Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. And it seems like I'll say this, a lot of people we talk to say that no longer works. I mean,
well,
go ahead.
I understood what Michelle was saying. But Michelle didn't mean for us to roll over. Yeah. I don't think it's going low. When I say we ought to be aware of our history, we ought to be aware of the history of the country. We ought to look at what happened to that great democracy called Germany in the 1930s, and Italy with Mussolini. We have to be aware of that. Israel just went back to Netanyahu, and all the headline says he's getting ready to put together the most conservative right-wing cabinet in the history of Israel. What does that mean in Israel? We see that happening. What just happened in Italy? What's this lady's name in Italy? We see is happening globally. When Joe Biden started getting traction, all of a sudden we saw the Russians sitting down with the OPEC nations, and they decided we're going to reduce the production of oil by 2 million gallons a day. What does that to do? To drive the cost of gasoline up so as to turn people against Joe Biden because of the price at the pumps. That's what they're doing. And so when I said, are you telling me that I would rather trade my freedom as a democracy if you just give me cheaper gasoline? That's the choice they're offering us. We can't afford to bite on that. We just can't afford to bite on that, especially when Joe Biden says, well, I can't do much about the price of gas, but I can bring down your cost of medicine. And we are allowing Medicare to negotiate for the cost of medicine, and the experts say it's going to reduce the cost of medicine by 30%. That's a good deal. That's the way you fight inflation. Most of the Medicare patients, most of the Social Security people, they don't buy gas in the first place.
That's right.
So come on.
Well, Congressman, we certainly could talk to you all night. This is the NMPA special coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. We got a bunch of people waiting to come on. Congressman, we certainly appreciate you. I know you and Dr. Chavis will be talking, and keep writing those columns, because we all are reading them. So we thank you so much, Congressman.
Well,
I'm gonna
I
keep
just want to
fighting. I'm
also
gonna keep
thank.
writing. I'm gonna keep
Yes,
talking.
very good.
Look, there's one thing to be said. People keep talking about, well, we got to get younger people on the scene. Well, there's one thing about being 82 years old. Some things you don't give a damn about anymore.
I got you. I got you. Well,
Okay.
we thank you.
Congressman,
You
All
gave
right.
us a
man.
history lesson
And
tonight.
this is what people say about me. I'm like Abraham Lincoln about that. I'm gonna do my duty.
Yes.
The congressman came well prepared tonight. He was
Well,
ready.
thank you.
He was ready to rock and roll for sure. Thanks so much, Congressman. The polls have closed in Virginia. They've closed in Georgia. James Wright of the Washington Informer is reporting that early voting, or at least it looks like the turnout in Georgia has been pretty impressive. He says the number of early votes cast surpasses the early voting in the 2018 midterm. Lauren Burke comes back with us. And we also, I believe we have Michael Blake joining us, the CEO of Atlas Strategy Group and former DNC vice chair and New York Assembly member. And also joining us now is Abdul Dusamu. Did I say that right?
That was good. That was good.
That was good. Welcome to the Black Press. We appreciate you guys jumping on. So let's start with Michael Blake. Michael Blake, again, thanks for joining us. You're a strategist. What did you see going into tonight, and what do you see as a result of what's been going on and the strategy that has been used on both sides, really?
Well, first, obviously, Whip Clyburn was preaching just ahead of us right now. So we all got to make sure we stay focused here. Look, I'm going to say this right now, and I want people to internalize it. I think you're going to see a lot of Black surprises for the good when all is said and done. I think we need to be patient that a lot of races we care about are not going to be resolved tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to assess right now that what you're seeing across the country is that people are showing up in droves. And not only are they showing up, they're showing up in some areas in beyond presidential numbers. So just for context, Pennsylvania, for example, what we've seen thus far as of about 5:30 this afternoon, some of the early voting turnout that came in, and I want to make sure I share this in real time.
Yes, please.
Was effectively at a rate that was, so it's about 4,000 people, give or take, in 2018, last midterm. 2022, 71,000. You're talking about a 1,700% increase. Texas, same thing. Wisconsin, 117%. Florida, they've expanded out in some of the places there. North Carolina, we got a message. There are going to be multiple places that go a little bit later because of the lines being that long. We're fighting for democracy, but also be very clear. We fight against racism. We fight against folks who don't care about Black folk. We fight against the realities of that. And what I think you're seeing right now is that people have said enough, but we have to be patient and remind ourselves. 2 years ago, I was in Pennsylvania those final days. The race did not get called until Saturday. A lot of these places, it's going to take some time. Some of these places, they can't even open the ballots until tonight. It's against the law for them to do so. So while you're sipping your coffee or sipping your wine or whatever it is you're going to be sipping on tonight, everybody, be patient. But Black folk are showing up, and we're hoping that the rest of the country does the same thing that they need to for Black folk as well.
Well, thanks for that. Abdul, I want to bring Abdul and Lauren back. I'm sure Lauren probably has a number of questions to ask, but Abdul, let's, from your vantage point, all the work that you've done, do you feel confident tonight?
Well, look, I feel confident that Black voters are going to do what we always have, and that is resist and overcome. Certainly, I think part of the story of this election and all elections held in the post-Shelby County landscape that we live in and in the post-2020 landscape that we live in is that we are facing a new era of voter suppression. And our communities are called to do everything that we can to resist and overcome, to make sure that our voice is heard. So My organization, the Young Black Lawyers Organizing Coalition, has been on the ground in key battleground states over the last several weeks. We have fully funded some 70 Black law students to travel to North Carolina, to Georgia, to Texas, to do voter protection organizing in Black churches, to knock doors in Black communities, to talk to Black voters about the resources they need to protect their vote. It's important in this era that we not just encourage people to go vote, but that we also make sure they have the resources they need to protect their vote. And so that's the work that we've been doing alongside a number of other organizations. And I am confident that at the end of the day, that work that our community organizations have been putting in will be successful in ensuring that our voters are able to express their hopes and dreams for this country. So I'm confident in our communities, I'm confident in our community organizations, but I think we should not by any means be deluded into thinking that we're fighting on a fair landscape in this moment. We are not. And part of the work that we have to do moving forward is to make sure that we can get back to a fair voting landscape. So that's my 2 cents right now.
Well, it's a lot. That's a lot of 2 cents. Coming up soon at the bottom of the hour is Melanie Campbell, the convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Lauren, I'm gonna throw it over to you.
Guys, I wanted to know if you saw that little discussion. I'm sure you saw with regard to Stacey Abrams' campaign and Black men. I'm wondering what you are hearing out there in terms of what. I don't think it'll be anything wildly different than most voters, but are you hearing any issues from Black men specifically that they're bringing up that's important to them in particular that the media has not mentioned? I frankly believe that Black men never get mentioned, and when they do get mentioned, it's all negative, or they're either invisible or it's something negative, or they get blamed for something. So I kind of feel like I want to hear some of that from you guys because it's just a discussion that no one else is likely to have.
Lauren, you literally said I was going to say, and I'm sure, in respect to you, King, for what you're doing and making sure we stand up for our lawyers across the country. Look, as someone who served in the assembly for 6 years here in New York, was a national vice chair for 4, worked for President Obama before that for 6, and ran Black outreach at the White House. You would think that Black men don't exist when they're talking about elections right now in this country, right? It's surreal, and then we wonder why we have so many of these races. We got to go back to 2016 throughout, right? Why was the former president able to win into some of these states? Because you had such depressed turnout in Black communities, and you had Black men who felt regularly, y'all not even trying to talk to us, and you only want to talk to us as if something is wrong. So why should I care? And that has only sustained itself till now. And when we think about the reflections that are going on, the only conversation that's happening is about a clown in Herschel Walker who has no business on the stage with Senator Raphael Warnock in a tied race that, unless either one gets 50% plus one, we're talking about now a runoff in December 6th, where we're going to now have a conversation in this country of an incredibly qualified Black man against another Black man, which then makes it even more difficult. What we need to be talking about is how Sharif Street in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and his leadership is probably the reason why we're going to have wins up and down that ballot. Black man. We should be talking about Jevin Hodge in Arizona 1, who would be the first Black man elected to Congress. Literally a tied race. We have to make sure he brings this home. What we should be talking about is Garland Gilchrist in Michigan, who's going to be reelected as lieutenant governor. But what is regularly happening is that society only wants to talk about Black men as if we are extinct, rather than talking about us in the impact that we have. And what I think is essential, no matter what happens tonight, no matter what happens this week, you are going to have immediately emerge Black men who decide to run campaigns and say, we will be the voices that are out here. We're not going to continue to have you talk about us as if we're only victims, you're going to start talking about us as the victors that we are.
Well, two projected winners already. Right now, ABC News is projecting that Senator Todd Young, Republican out of Indiana, and Senator Tim Scott, Republican out of South Carolina, have held on to their Senate seats, defeating Thomas McDermott Jr. and State Rep Crystal Matthews, respectively. So those are very, very first projections that are in right now. Polls have now closed in Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, as we stated, Vermont and Virginia. And so far, 2 races ABC News feels comfortable calling already, the South Carolina race. Lauren?
No surprise there. No surprise there. I mean, obviously we get these, the races obviously we're going to get first in the first 20 minutes are all the ones that we know what's going to happen. But certainly, as Michael already indicated, we're going to be up all night and probably up all week with a lot of these races.
Yeah. And Michael, as Lauren said, those two, you knew that was going to happen there, right? And many people are looking for surprises. Where is that surprise tonight? And some are obviously, as we start at the top of the show, talk about this red wave that could be coming. What realistically can folks expect tonight?
I don't think there's going to be a red wave. I'm saying it right now. I don't think there's going to be a red wave. I think when you're looking at what's happening, I'm a minister, so I can't say it as direct. I think folk are angry that we're having a conversation about abortion and the foolishness of that, and what the Republicans call out who the Republicans have done. I think that as a Democrat, we became better towards the end in making it clear that the economy and inflation is not Joe Biden's fault, right? We should have been doing that long before that, but I think people finally started to realize, you know what? Hey, my gas going up, and Whip Clyburn was talking about it. Yo, gas going up was not because of Uncle Joe, right? These folks just out here lying to your face. But I also think in terms of some of these elections, I do think you're going to have a scenario in some of these states where you're going to have some split turnout, split results, where you're going to have a Republican and a Democrat that's going to win statewide races in some of these places. Because I think what you're going to see is that some of these federal candidates are so ridiculous that folks can be like, you know what, I could rock with this person for my statewide positions, but there's no way on earth I'm sending you to Washington to represent me, right? And I think that is what I'm looking for. But I go back to where I started. I think there's going to be some good and great surprises of what's going to happen on tonight and throughout this week.
Well,
and I also want to show love, because we mentioned the lawyers that are going out across the country. You got to think about what's going on that we got. Again, it's going to take some time. Florida, when you have the state of Florida literally saying that the Department of Justice, you can't come in and monitor our elections. Right. Like the element of white privilege is at a crazy high. Like I can't even internalize someone saying that DOJ is showing up on my community. Like, yeah, you just can't come here. Right. And so when we think about that, I also think those are some of the elements of surprise that we also got to be mindful of as well. But I would love to have Abdul and others feedback as well.
Well, Abdul.
Well, I think the part of the story that hasn't been told and never quite gets told enough is the examples of voter suppression that sometimes we don't think of as voter suppression, right? So, I think there's this sense that voter suppression looks a certain way, wears a certain hat, it has a certain sort of feel to it. But the reality is that when you show up to the polling place that you've been voting at for 40 years, and that polling place is no longer a polling place, that's voter suppression. When you get to the polling place and the machines are supposed to be up and running at 7 a.m. And they're not, that's voter suppression. And we have seen widespread reports of that today across the country. I was working on an issue earlier in Texas, in Tarrant County, which is one of the largest counties in the state of Texas, where we saw widespread late openings because of machine malfunctions in that county. And so, I think it's important for part of this conversation to be that yes, we're seeing high turnout in many places. And yes, our communities are going to do what we've always done, which is resist and overcome. But no, that does not mean there's no voter suppression. That does not mean that some of these efforts to undermine our vote are not having an impact on the ground. And it's important for us to keep that in view, because as we move forward, you heard Leader Clyburn talk about this the next few weeks of this congressional term. It's important for us to have a national conversation about what we want to see happen. And part of that conversation needs to be a renewed focus on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, a renewed focus on restoring some semblance of power to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so that's the lens that I'm looking at this through. But I also want to speak quickly to Lauren's question earlier about Black men. We've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks with young Black people, period. And the sense we've gotten from young Black people, Black men, Black women, is that they are just not being heard. Nobody's talking about their issues. They feel disconnected from our politics. And so part of the conversation that we also must have, those of us who believe in the power of electoral democracy to transform people's lives, part of the conversation we have to have is how do we hold ourselves accountable to changing this system so that it actually is responsive to the needs and concerns of young Black people, wherever they are, because there's an entire generation out there that just feels completely disconnected from the process. And the work that we do is to go in and explain why that's self-defeating, right? Disengaging is self-defeating. You've got to make sure that you're at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You've got to make sure that you understand that the revolution may not be televised, but it's going to have to be legislated and it's going to have to be signed into law. And you have a voice in who gets to do that.
So Abdul, we have a president of the United States that just did a big thing on trying to, help people with their student loans. And like every time we have this talk about young voters and feeling disconnected, can you speak a little bit more about exactly what they're talking about with regard to issues? Because frankly, in the last few years, and I think really Obama sort of kicked a lot of this off, when you see politicians like Cori Bush and AOC, they seem to be communicating on a very direct level that, to me, if you can't hear this level of communication, I'm mentioning AOC because I'm from the Bronx, and that's a level of communication that may not work everywhere in this country, and I get that. The other half of my family is from Virginia, so I get that. But I grew up in New York, and that form of that younger communicative, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm saying exactly how it needs to be said, no BS. That's kind of a growing trend to me in this politics, even by older politicians, by the way. I think Maxine Waters and the gang do just as well as AOC a lot of times. But I'm saying, can you talk a little bit more about what exactly those young people were talking about that you had talked to?
I think part of what we're hearing is less the performative and more the substantive.
Okay.
Right. I think many people assume that the performative translates to these young people because they're on all these platforms and all of that. And the reality is that from what we've heard, they're looking around their communities. They're seeing that the schools haven't been updated. They're seeing, not a lot of economic opportunity in their communities. And so they're saying, how does this translate into real changes in my lived experience? Right. And, I think part of what we have to do, you speak to the student loan piece, part of what we have to do is make that argument, is talk to people about how that, and I know it sounds like, oh gosh, we did it, so people should get it, but it isn't always the case.
No, I got you. Well, Michael, you gotta jump.
Well, Lauren, we gotta. I'm sorry, Lauren. We gotta let them jump. I know they gotta run, but Karen,
before Mike jumps, is the New York worry about Hochul? Is that real? Is that real?
No, she's gonna win. It'll be much closer than it should be.
All right.
But it's the wake up call that everyone needs right now.
Okay. That's all.
You should stop taking Black and brown folk for granted.
Right. Okay.
Thanks so
All right,
much,
thanks a lot.
Appreciate you.
Michael and Abdul. We really appreciate it. Joining us now, Democratic strategist Karen Finney. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good to see you again. Sorry to keep you waiting.
It's okay. It was an important conversation. I was
Well,
enjoying it.
right now, we got some early returns. Governor Georgia, only 12% is in, but Stacey Abrams right now has the early vote, 58% to 41%. In Florida, after about 34% now has been counted, 34% of the vote. DeSantis has a 52 to 48 lead there, percentage wise. And I saw something too. I wanted to Warnock and Herschel Walker, the early return there, 12% is in and counted, 62% for Warnock, 37% for Walker. It's way early, Karen. We know that. Way early.
I know. If only some of those numbers could stay like that all night, right?
But and just to piggyback off that last conversation with Michael, I mean, you're a strategist. You've done unbelievable work over your career. Going into tonight, there was some dissension, in the ranks. Senator Manchin went after the president publicly, even made some what some perceive with threats, like he's going to regret this. That doesn't bode too well going into election night, does it?
No, but look, I mean, I think this is the moment where the voters get to have their say. And I think it's so important that we step back and we listen. What is it that they're telling us? What are they telling us are the issues that mobilize them, that brought them out to vote, their concerns? I mean, this is where we really get the important information. And I think you were talking about this earlier. It's such an important point that, there's going to be a point, throughout the night, it's going to shift back and forth. But we won't know the final answers until all the votes are counted. And I think the reality we have to remember, particularly, post, as we learned in the pandemic, as people, they vote early in person, they vote by mail, they vote on election day. It's not just election day and election night, it could be election week. And that's okay because it means the system is working. We know there have been some challenges today. And again, the good thing is the system was working in that there were people there to match those challenges, to keep polls open where they needed to, all of that. So I think it's really important. We've still got a lot of folks on the West Coast who are still voting. So I want them to stay in line and stay excited to vote.
And that's you're the second person that mentioned about lines and you're saying stay in lines. We saw that come into play 4 years ago, right?
That's right.
Talk about that a little bit, if you will, and the importance of getting that word, because now with these new laws everywhere, you can't give them water, you can't give folks food, you can't do certain things. How important is it now, and how do you beat the lines if you can't?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, in most places, if you are in line before the polls close, you get to vote. So that's why we say it is so important. And remember, when we talk about, for example, in the federal races and the balance of power in Congress, for example, there are a number of key races in California that can mean the difference of what that margin is. So, as the results move to the West, again, I want our folks in the West, if you are in line, if you haven't gone to vote yet and your polls are still open, go vote and stay in line. Call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. If you have any issues, go to iwillvote.com. If you have any questions before you go to vote, I mean, it's just so important. And yeah, we've got to, there have been, some different things that people are doing, from having music and, so forth, to try to make it a fun atmosphere while you're standing in line. Yeah. But it's critical. I remember in the 2008 election, we were doing radio shows and, asking people to make sure you stay in line, because again, this is the moment the voters get to have their say.
Yeah, yeah, and earlier we talked to Congressman Clyburn, and he made some very very strong points about what has been accomplished that has been
Yeah.
pretty much not covered.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's so much. I mean, for me, I think back to what it was like this time last year during COVID, or prior to President Biden and Vice President Harris being elected. It was a very dark time. I mean, we were living by tweets. I mean, that was what was driving our news cycles. It was a very erratic time. The We didn't have a plan to deploy vaccines, and we got vaccines. We got them into our communities. We got relief out to people. We got the child tax credit, which lifted, hundreds of thousands of children out of
Yeah.
poverty and helped families. That I heard you mentioning earlier, help for student loans, but changing federal policy on marijuana possession, and we got infrastructure money that I think, sometimes people, maybe they don't see it right away in their daily lives, but if that bridge gets fixed, if your roads get fixed, that matters, right? Because as my father used to remind me, if you pop a tire on a bad road, you got to go fix that tire. That is an economic impact on your life. And so I do think there's so much more that this administration has accomplished than they have gotten credit for. Some of that I think has to do with how some of the mainstream media actually covers what's happening on the day-to-day basis. There tends to be a bit more they focus a little bit more on drama rather than what's the policy, how's it going to affect you. But I was also interested in the conversation you were having before. I mean, look, I want to say that I think that overall the Democratic Party has done a better job this year, this cycle, than ever before in reaching out to Black voters, Latino voters, API voters. However, there is still more to do. And we know the reality in this country is, particularly if you're a Democrat, you cannot win without putting together a coalition that includes Black people. Period, full stop. So, right? I mean, it just ain't gonna happen. Maybe in Alaska where you also need native, the native Alaskans, right? But what that means is we've got to keep changing the way we do campaigns. The person who really understood this early on, Stacey Abrams,
Right.
back in 2012, when she was looking at changing demographics in her state, she was one of the people to say that. So I hope that continues. And part of what that means is communicating with people on a full-time basis, not just around the election, about what's going on, helping people feel that they are accountable for their vote and for the things that they wanted, that they said they wanted when they voted.
Yeah, Karen, I know you don't have much time. We really appreciate you jumping. I want to see if Lauren has a question for you. Lauren Burke,
Sure.
our Capitol Hill
Hey, Karen.
reporter.
Hello.
You know what? I don't have a question. I just want to say to you, Karen, I read your story last year about your health challenge, and I had a health challenge last year, and it's just great to see you. You look great. You sound
Thank
great.
you.
And can't wait
you.
to see you more on CNN. I don't really have a question. You covered everything very well that I wanted to hear.
It's interesting because the last time we had Karen Finney on, I mentioned that too, that health challenge. She doesn't look like she has had
Look
any
great. Look great.
health challenges
Thank
at all.
you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. We
Thanks
really
for joining
appreciate
us.
you
And-
jumping on.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Really appreciate being with y'all. And, again, it's going to be an interesting week.
Yes,
Let's say
it
that.
is.
Stay tuned.
An interesting
Yeah.
week, not just an interesting night, right?
Definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Again, this is the Black Press of America special coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. Joining us now from the Advancement Project, Judith Brown Deanna's, as Greer says, my homegirl. She's a queen from Queens.
Queens.
Judith, I think you're on mute.
Your homegirl is here. How are you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm in the car because we've been out in the streets all day.
Yeah, I hear you.
Trying to make sure things are okay for voters and all that. So sorry to be in the car.
No worries at all. And Melanie Campbell, the convener of the Black Women's Roundtable, is also joining us. Melanie, hi.
Hi there. How you doing?
Good to have you. Judith, let me go to you first, and then Lauren, you can jump in at any time. But
Mhm.
you're on the ground. You're in New York. What is the feeling there tonight?
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
among Black folks. We really want to know about
Yeah.
Black folks.
Yeah, well, I'm in Georgia today.
Oh, okay.
Been here for a few days, and I think there's excitement, right? Like our people know what's at issue, they know what's at stake, and they're handling their business, And so, it's been a good day. We haven't had many problems at the polling places. That's what I'm here for. As an attorney, make sure things go smoothly. I think we've had some issues with a lot of police presence, but not intimidating, but just there, which to Black folks is intimidating. And so, folks were, they're ready for this.
Yeah.
They're ready to see change, and they're turning out.
Well, and Melanie Campbell, again, the Black Women's Roundtable. Black women, of course, we know dominated the 2020 election cycle. What's it looking like from a Black woman's perspective? What are the Black women doing in 2022 for the midterms?
Oh, we showing up and showing out as we always do. I saw my sister Judith yesterday. Roundiana, it's good to see you, my sister.
Good to see
you. We are. I was talking just a few minutes ago and talking about there's a drum beat out there. And it was light earlier in the summer, and it's been getting louder and louder. We went on this Power the Ballot tour for a month, and I tell you, our people understand the real threat that's out there, and I think that what we're seeing are the fruits of folks, many folks. My organization, Judith organization, all of us doing everything. We put it all in with limited resources, quite frankly, this cycle, but our people are showing up, and I think our young people who showed up like they did in 2018 may not be every place, but in many places where the message got to them and they got their peers out, are showing up. We've been on Clark over here at our National Command Center. We have 2 locations this year: one at Clark Atlanta at our institute, and one at Howard University that Dr. Elsie Scott is leading. And we've been with students all day as well, and young people, young organizers. And look, they're fired up and they get it. They understand what, and so I'm optimistic that we're going to have some good things that come place. But we're going to also have some stuff that we're not going to, that's not good for this country, let alone our communities as well. But this is a long game. It's a long fight, and it's not going to get fixed overnight.
That's right.
And I'll say again, I don't know, the folks who think that this is going to be about some minority group controlling all of us, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. And it's not just about tonight. It's about the continuous movement that's being built and the connections are being made. And I'm looking at some of these polls that are coming out, and I don't listen to polls, but I rather like the ones that come after people vote. That's when you really kind of know the real deal.
Right.
They're looking pretty good. That people were voting. Around issues that matter to them, and understand that we have the power. That's what we said. The power of the ballot is in our hands. So I'm feeling pretty good, cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. In Florida right now, 61% of the vote is in. Marco Rubio has a pretty solid lead right now, 54 to 45% over Congresswoman Val Demings, but still a long way to go there. We just saw, you see me looking to my left, I just saw some early returns on the governor's race in Florida. 61% of the vote is in. Ron DeSantis commanding 56% to 43% lead there. That's one of those races are among the important ones that we are all keeping an eye on. But Georgia, Herschel Walker right now looks like Raphael Warnock, Senator Warnock, is in a commanding position there, and that's where Judith is in Georgia. Judith, you talked about the enthusiasm in Georgia. Are you feeling that enthusiasm in other places as well?
Yeah, I think actually our team was in Virginia and also in Florida, and we saw people, turning out. Like I said, they're handling their business. But I want to give a cautionary tale, right? The cautionary note around this is, number one, we need to make sure that every vote is counted, right? Like election day is not actually the day when everything is necessarily over, right?
Right.
Because we want to make sure that every vote is counted. We don't care how long it takes, just count every vote, right? Second is that just because, we may have turned out, doesn't mean that voter suppression did not happen, right? And just because I may not have received a lot of calls that made me go everywhere all day doesn't mean voter suppression happened. I'm sitting in a state in Georgia where they passed a significant voter suppression law after we turned out in record numbers in 2020, right? And that means that there were barriers for people. Our people are used to overcoming barriers, but that doesn't mean that that is just. That doesn't mean that that is what equal voting looks like, right? It just means that we had to try harder. So that means that voter suppression happened. So even if we see those numbers are up, I want people to understand that that doesn't mean that voter suppression did not happen. We should not have to jump over more barriers than white people to vote.
Amen.
Right.
Melanie Campbell, and thanks so much, Judith, as always. You're on the run, so please
Thank
check
you.
back in with us when you can.
I will. You take care.
All right. And Melanie Campbell, before we let you go, please give us just an outlook. I mean, tomorrow's another day. Of course, it's the day after, and you talked a lot about planning for the future. What happens tomorrow? Either way, despite results, what it needs to take place tomorrow.
I think tomorrow, besides getting a little rest, I don't know what it looks like these days. But I think tomorrow we do have to assess, because I don't think all the election results will be in. We won't know all, but we do have to stop and assess what did happen. And we've got to do some analysis about what that means for our communities,
Right.
especially when you had so many people running, and to see where there was fairness. Judith mentioned it. We should not have to jump hoops to vote. There is voter suppression, and not just voter suppression taking place. You got places where you had in Louisiana. I think I heard you say something about it. But where you had people who had bomb threats at precincts. We're living in a different moment. In Pennsylvania, you had people breaking into fights at precincts. So it's real. This time it wasn't just voter suppression about long lines and machines. It's also the concern around safety of people possibly showing up to bring harm because they don't like how Black folks vote, or brown folks vote, or young people and others, of what they call others, in this really challenging time we have, where racism is real, white nationalism is real, right? And so we have to contend with that at the ballot box. It's not the first time, and unfortunately it won't be the last time. But when it comes to beyond that, then we also celebrate where we were victorious in pushing back and also pushing forward. There's so many people on the ballot. I think some of this historic, there will be some historic elections made for Black political power building in this country. And also we have the challenges as well. But mainly for me is really assessing it so we can go deeper about what does this mean from a strategy, from a federal to a local level, what we need to do, and where we may victory, make sure that we hold those folks accountable. And 24 starts right after the polls close, quite honestly.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, well, Melanie Campbell, convener of the Black Women's Roundtable, thank you so much for joining the Black Press of America tonight in our special election coverage. And now we want to welcome Brandon Jessup of the State Voices. He's joining us now. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Hey, Stacey, how you doing?
Good to have you back. You probably know Lauren Burke. Who doesn't know Lauren Burke?
How you doing?
Hey, who doesn't? I definitely. How you doing, Miss Burke? All right?
How you doing? How you doing, Brandon?
I can't complain.
So Brandon, here we are. You know, we talked the other day, and tonight's the night,
We
as they
called this
say.
out, didn't we?
Yeah, we talked the talk. So, you know, as you sit there, you've done so much, you know, so much work. Um, you know, how's things looking from the work that you guys have done? Are you getting complaints at all? Are you getting phone? Is that hotline burning?
Yeah, you know, honestly, 866 our vote, it wasn't as loud as it was in 2018, to be very honest about that. But some of the more consistent complaints are the things that we know are impacts from redistricting, right? And some of the same things that, like Ms. Campbell brought up earlier. Judy, Ron Dianis, like, I used to work for the Advancement Project a while back. A friend of State Voice is right. Say it all the time, like, hey, listen, it's the operational parts about this. It's the election administrators when, hey, you have entire cities' poll books be reading incomplete, like we saw in Michigan this morning, right? And then so when you see entire states saying, or a city saying that you have all duplicate votes and ballots, right? You have to wait before you can even get the process started. So those are the things that we saw. Folks trying to make sure that, like, hey, am I at the right polling spot? And if so, why does this state website have this other place there? You already heard about Loudoun County, I believe, in Pennsylvania, that's going to have their polls open until 10 o'clock this evening. 3 counties in North Carolina extended their voting hours because of just issues getting the polls open on time. So yes, the direct aggression has probably been a little bit more individualized, but the overall preparation by some states to prepare for a day like this, knowing that you had an increase in early vote turnout across the country, right? So then that doesn't mean you're going to have less people show up on election day. We should know now that when you get a high turnout leading up to election day, you should prepare for an even bigger party on election day. And some states haven't done that.
Yeah. Lauren?
We're in a lot of, like you were saying, that certainly these redistricting changes create a lot of problems. Earlier in Virginia, we heard a lot of that. Like, it was just people at the wrong place. And then it got quiet. Like at about after like 2 or 3 o'clock, the complaints, I guess,
It slowed down.
Yeah, it slowed down. I mean, are you seeing that same effect or what?
That happens when you see states and election administrators kind of like correct themselves and self-correct, right? When you have good means in place to say, hey, you know, it's not Jim A, it's Jim B down the street. But like in a place like Louisiana, when there are issues and where you should actually, which door you should go into, and when you see election administrators like pretty much bootstrapping it together and writing a sign on paper saying, enter here, vote here, what happens when the wind blows? Right. And so you got to think not to blame the election worker, but it's about these secretaries of state who are up on the ballot in a lot of these states, right? Like, these are the folks who, in absence of making sure that the wheels of democracy were well oiled and ready to turn, they were probably considering other things. Maybe they were on a ballot. Maybe they were election deniers, and maybe they want to do other things that were not necessarily being focused on making sure democracy works. So, you know, I hope that voters, if you had any kind of issue at the polls, take a good look at the folks that's on that ballot. And it might make you change your tune as you were walking into that space. But like, yeah, I say, like in states like Virginia, when you see the issues turned down, like, yeah, the administrators took in place. And in a lot of cases, it's not just the administrators, it's the community as well, because they're the folks that flag it first for them.
Or is there a state that's coming up as a big hit in terms of problems? Is there anybody in particular?
Not necessarily right now. I'll be very honest. Not a big state with problems. There are a lot of states with very similar repetitive problems, like Arizona is one of those. And, you know, we saw that consistently all the way through early voting, right? You heard about the intimidation, and now, you know, you see it playing its way out today. Now, not any violent confrontations, thankfully.
Right.
But, you know, that's been the case. Pennsylvania has always been a hotly contested state. States where we know Georgia is another state. Now, what I'm concerned about now are the challenges that will be placed on county boards over these next few weeks to strike people from the vote. In Detroit, I'm sorry, not in Detroit, but in Wayne County, Michigan, there was an attempt by a candidate for state secretary of state to remove 22,000 people from the rolls before today. Okay. You had another situation, I think we talked about this yesterday, in Georgia with 33,000 in Gwinnett County. Okay. And you see it all across the country. And all these things come from these quote unquote audits that were state funded, sometimes partisanly funded. And you see those same partisan groups now take those lists and begin the old practice of voter caging. And we know what voter caging is for, is to make sure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color aren't able to vote, that they're disenfranchised for the process.
And Brandon, I know you had some thoughts out of Louisiana. Before we talk about that, let's show this clip.
In East Baton Rouge Parish, there are 129,000 eligible Black voters. Only 12,520 showed up to vote. In Orleans Parish, there are 145,000 eligible Black voters. Only 16,000 showed up to vote. In Caddo Parish, there are 73,000 Black voters. Only 6,955 showed up to vote early. In Jefferson Parish, 73,000 Black voters, 6,428 showed up to vote early. In Lafayette Parish, 37,000 Black voters, 2,751 showed up to vote. In Ouachita Parish, 37,000 Black voters, 2,928 showed up to vote. In Calcasieu Parish, 31,000 Black voters, 2,260 showed up to vote. St. Landry, 25,000, 3,038 showed up. St. Tammany, 22,000, 2,409 showed up to vote. And in Tangipahoa, 21,000 eligible Black voters and 1,541 showed up to vote. There are 900,000 registered Black voters. 96,000 Black voters have showed up so far. That means for every Black person in Louisiana right now that you see, when you see 10, only one of them voted. John Kennedy was elected with 536,000 votes. He is talking about crackheads, and I'm talking about change. The question is, how bad do you want change? Get up and do something. Share this video so that people.
Brandon?
And Gary on fire, ain't he? Gary on fire. And what Gary was saying was the truth. It's the whole truth. Those numbers out of Louisiana are abysmal. When we think about the work of the Louisiana table, our friends of Louisiana Power and Justice Coalition, and they have a ballot initiative out now to abolish involuntary servitude in Louisiana. Okay, and so when we at State Voices and tables, especially when you think about Louisiana, they got a field campaign on, I think, about 200 field organizers knocking doors right now, and there is a clear disconnect in a lot of communities about whether or not elected officials can articulate change and facilitate change in the current system that we have. I was born in Orleans, Louisiana. That's my home. If you look at Katrina, you just look at those types of things and the kind of resources that we've received from the federal government and the state government. It's time for Louisiana to have radical change. Georgia made a decision to create radical change. And it took 10 years of consistently building on the ground to get to the crescendo that we saw in January 2021.
Yeah, okay. and let me just say that video was from last week. Just for full context there.
Thank you. So Louisiana got an opportunity. Today is the primary for Louisiana. All right, a very pivotal race for candidates. With the turnout like it might be, okay, I don't think it'd be as low as it was a couple of years ago, and I think Gary's numbers were based on early vote as of right now. In states like Louisiana, Tennessee, that really need to have serious long-term strategy building that in a lot of cases partisan groups aren't going to give you. That's where State Voices fall into the place at. That's all I can really say, because we know that we don't eat elephants one bite a whole bite. You got to eat them a bite at a time. And when you're talking about a voter participation of less than 15% in some areas, That's not new to the United States. You can see the same thing in Cleveland. Detroit consistently turns out 18, 20% for their municipal elections. Okay. So I think there is a question that Black folks have about our political power in the current system and how it articulates itself. Didn't Louisiana go through redistricting as well? And so when we think about, like, you got to give Gary a big shout out, because to even rise up through the Democratic Party in Louisiana is a testament to Black power. Let's be very honest, because you could sit up and have two candidates that sound exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I wanna highlight the work of Black political power in Louisiana to make sure you have people of color represented in the primary to run for U.S. Senate for that state. Those numbers need to be improved on, and that's where leaders like Ashley Shelton, the director of the Louisiana of the Power and Justice Coalition in Louisiana, that's where we make those connections, like we talked about yesterday. And those are the people who doing the movement building year round. They don't stop. So I know, yeah, the early vote numbers don't look good. I'm very interested to see what today's turnout is, because Louisiana is a day of state. A lot of folks in Louisiana vote at the polls. That's what it is. So let's see how it looked like today. And then we remember that the general election for Louisiana is in December. So, hey, if we got family in Louisiana and you know they didn't vote in the primary, make sure you don't forget about December, because they still voting down there in Louisiana. That's all. That's what I'm gonna say about that. But I don't want to poo-poo on what Gary said, because he told the truth. Those numbers don't make no sense if you're trying to build political power.
Well, Brandon Jessup, State Voices, man, we really appreciate you dropping in. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Hey, I appreciate y'all. And if anybody got any problems at the polls, please call 866-OUR-VOTE. The hotlines are still open.
And and y'all heard that. And as we bring in Jim Washington of the Atlanta Voice, 30% of the vote in the governor's race is in, and right now Stacey Abrams has a 53% to 47% lead on the governor, Kemp. And also joining us out of California, San Diego, the publisher of the Voice and Viewpoint, is Dr. John Warren, and Dr. Benjamin Chavis is joining us again as well. So we got some power brokers, Lauren.
I see that. And you see, Georgia, hopefully will be closer than everybody predicted. I want to hear from Jim about what have you been hearing in Georgia about what issues specifically are people talking about? Because I think what tends to happen in the media is that, you know, the media will talk about what will get them audience rather than what people are actually talking about on the ground, which is always a little bit of a disconnect there, Jim. So tell me what you're hearing in Atlanta.
Well, from the beginning, what we've heard all along is a concerted effort for, I'll just say the Republican side, to hammer inflation, et cetera, and make Joe Biden the enemy. So everybody has positioned themselves or positioned Democratic candidates to be Joe Biden, what do you call it? Joe Biden supporters. Joe Biden, you're running against Joe Biden, if you will. Warnock's running against Joe Biden. Right. Stacey Abrams is running against. So everybody's running, and what they're beating them over the head with is inflation. Some of those early issues of abortion and voter suppression and those kind of things, I can't say they peaked early, but a lot of people are talking about they peaked and then they kind of stabilized, if you will. So now the question becomes the early vote, and what you're seeing in the early results is that, you know, in Georgia they count those who voted early first. So there's no doubt about who went to the polls first, and so they're waiting to see that gap change a little bit, or a lot, if you will, as it relates to those folks who go day of. And even though there's a large turnout here, the day of scenario in Georgia is always indicated that that's a Republican stronghold.
Oh, so they projected even one, huh?
Say what? I'm sorry, I heard something. But anyway,
go ahead.
That's the case. But now, right now, the folks in the folks who are out reporting back to us and back to our place seem to think that it's a little too early to call.
Mhm.
The issue of Warnock, they think that that is a very, very doable kind of situation based on how he campaigned. I'm not trying to get you to, you ask about the ground game. So the ground game of Warnock was to distance himself from Joe Biden. All right. And to basically let the world know that he was pro Georgia, pro Georgian, if you will. He was a senator working on behalf of the community, and he had the credibility to do that, if you will. The time between Stacey Abrams, and let me say this about Stacey. I used to say that Tiger, everybody who played golf should basically send a check to Tiger Woods, because he raised the level of the pots that they were, the cost and the awards that they were playing. Everybody should do the same for Stacey Abrams, because somewhere along the line in this state, Stacey Abrams actually became the face of the Democratic Party, as opposed to a face for the governor of Georgia. Now, that's me. That's not anything anybody told me. I think that that may have been a little vulnerability for her, because they attacked her on being a surrogate for Joe Biden as opposed to a candidate for governor.
Well, we are at the top of the hour on the East Coast and a little after 5 on the West Coast. Dr. John Warren, it's always good to have you out in California. Dr. Warren, what are the races that concern California, Black Californians, the most?
Well, that's an interesting question, because we're a blue state, and people here have been focusing more on propositions than I think candidates, with a couple of exceptions. In California, the president came out here to help Mike Levine up in the Orange County area of the state, because we've taken the position that all of our Democratic seats, all of our congressional seats are important if we're going to hold on. Here in San Diego, we have 3 Democratic members of Congress, and they seem to be pretty much be shoe-ins, so there's not a problem there. And of course, in the Senate, we have Padilla, who took the vice president's seat. It's expected that he will do well, both running to finish her term and for his own term. He's on the ballot in 2 occasions, 2 situations. We don't have a problem in terms of the governor. He just was doing a recall. He's in good shape. The people are looking at what's happening in LA in terms of Karen Bass and her bid there to become the mayor, running against a billionaire opposition. And so those things get to be pretty important. But a lot of the attention is going to the propositions that are on the ballot, and they're very key. The number 1 proposition is the one that will protect the woman's right to choose. So that's Proposition 1 on our ballot. And then we have a real tug of war going on between Propositions 26 and 27, which are gaming propositions, and over $600 million has been pumped into it. The public has been confused by the tribes that are for and against the 2. And so the movement is reject both of these propositions so that we don't get caught up in that. And so those are major issues on the ballot. We also have an issue of a Prop 29 dealing with dialysis and state regulation of that. We have Prop 31 dealing with the whole tobacco thing, that we can get the flavors out of the picture once and for all. And so there are a number of issues going on here, but it's still a blue state. And there up north, there's a possibility of 1 or 2 Democratic seats that are at risk. I haven't heard a lot about them down here in the South, but this is where we are waiting. People have been voting here in large numbers. That the turnout has been pretty great. It's been a very rainy day in Southern California, so we don't know what the impact of the weather, but so many folks had already voted in advance, both by mail, in terms of getting their ballots in. And so it's a rather exciting time as we sit and we try to get people here to focus on what's happening in the rest of the country as well. So that if you know people in these targeted states, that you can call and get them out to vote. That's what we've been encouraging people to do here.
Yeah, early projections show that Governor DeSantis in Florida and Marco Rubio, the senator out of Florida, have won their races.
Yes.
Ohio will also retain its Republican governor based on the projections that are now being called. Those are the early calls, but again, it's going to be a long night. Lauren has some numbers too.
Yeah, I just, I basically had what you just read. Beasley, Sherry Beasley is doing a little bit better. I think we thought that she would do with like 45% in. She's up 54 to 44, but of course, there's only 45% in. I wanted to know from John. First, John, I need you to check your lottery tickets. I need you to check all your lottery tickets out there, John. Also, but I wanted you to hear your view on the Karen Bass race. The mayoral race in Los Angeles. If you could talk on that a little bit, what you think may happen there.
Well, I think the community, the communities of color seem to be rallying around her, and I don't think I'm calling this wrong. I think we've had situations in California before where we've had wealthy people who thought they could buy elections and they weren't able to do so, and so they've been kind of sent home. And we've had some attacks on Karen, but remember, Karen is a Black woman who's both served as Speaker of the Assembly, and she's been active in the Senate, and she's been as a member of Congress and local. So she's well fortified with the community in terms of people knowing her. And I think that she has a good chance of pulling it off.
Yeah, the vice president was just with her, I believe it was yesterday, campaigning with her there. Karen Bass was also the former Congressional Black Caucus chair, which of course, Vice President Harris was also a member of the CBC. Dr. Chavis, what are you hearing from the catbird seat in Washington, D.C.?
Well, so far, the black vote is proving the polls wrong. We're having record black voter turnout in Georgia. We're having record black voter turnout in Ohio. We're having record black voter turnout in Pennsylvania. We're having record black voter turnout in Michigan. We're having record black voter turnout in Wisconsin. So I think that, again, these polls, the exit polls and the pre-election day polls have skewed the reality of Black America. That's why the Black press, working with our HBCUs, we need our own polling apparatus. Not just when an election comes around, but all of the issues that affect our quality of life. And that's why this program is so glad. I'm glad we're having publishers like John Warren, like Jim Washington, like all the other publishers that have been on tonight. I'm waiting to hear from Al McFarland in Minnesota. I understand that black vote is high turnout and also in Minnesota. So across the board at this point, I'm so proud of my home state of North Carolina because black vote is also exceptionally high voter turnout in North Carolina. And that reflects Beasley's early lead over Bud for the United States Senate seat. So we have to be vigilant. A lot of votes are still not in. But at this point, we can say for the record that black voter turnout is higher than the pundits had thought of or that the pollsters had predicted.
Mm-hmm. And Jim Washington, again, let's go back to Georgia because, again, that's one of the
you're going to be here all night. Just recognize and rightfully so. To get back to what Lauren asked, what I left out was there is a fear in the state, across the state, that Herschel Walker could get through because Kemp will pull him over the finish line.
Right. Right.
And I mean, that's a reality that we all have to deal with. So when Doc says black voter turnout is high, that is a good thing, if you will. There's another side of it that we actually were, and this is just part of the process, we being the Atlanta voice, and we had people just about all over the state for a minute. And what we found out is that there were a number of black men who were pro Herschel Walker. And, and reporters then turned into advocates. So we had people out there trying to educate folks about what to do. And it was enlightening on one hand, but it was this, I'll use the term disheartening on another, because you would have thought the electorate would have been a little more black men would have been a little more observant of what was happening. Now, I only bring that up because I do not know, and Doc, if you take the black press out of this, I can't tell you what candidates, even that look like us, actually target the black male vote.
Well, nobody, nobody targets the black male vote.
So here, there was the Republicans set up an office, I forget, in College Park somewhere, and their sole purpose was to convince black men who usually did not vote by their records. And they just fed them because they were sending us all of the press releases, all of the commentary about why they should be Republican. It was, now you get to be my age and it becomes like, nonsense. But I guess if you're 24, 25, it may resonate in many ways. And that's something that your previous guest talked about. And I just want to bring here that communicating after elections, I do believe that you have a number of people who just do not connect policy to voting. If you follow me, policy is, I used to think that the money side of the house was going to be the last bastion of white power, and I mean financial power, if you will. And I thought that was the last thing that they were going to let go. Then Obama won. And there was a great groundswell that was very educational for me that ultimately said, you know what, political power makes policy, and policy affects you on the street. Now, that's not been a consistent message that says your vote changes your neighborhood. Your vote changes a number of things. We're looking at a special right now in between the election that talks about a television station here went and actually proved by documentary style reporting that black folks' homes were undervalued by appraisers. And so the television station did that, de-black your house, take out all the black pictures, take out anything that would reflect that the house was owned by a black person, and the appraisal went up considerably. I mean, this is systemic stuff here. So, I mean, the black press has a role in that. And I think we may need to be one, more aggressive. And the other side of it is we may need our own polling throughout the year to assess what's important to our people so we can report it consistently with that voice. I'm off my soapbox. I'm sorry.
No, well, you seem to echo what Dr. Chavis is saying about the polling, not just during election time, but a regular poll. You got to take the pulse of the community too. Lauren?
I will bet you, Jim, dinner at your favorite restaurant that black male voters will once again be the second most loyal voting bloc for the Democratic Party tonight. Herschel Walker or no Herschel Walker.
I'm not buying you.
We hear a lot of talk the minute that, I think this started really when Trump ran, and it showed that he had gotten more black male voters than, the Republican before that, which was to say that if you get anything, it's impressive. So I'm not a big believer in this whole theme that we've got in the media. Mainstream media loves to talk about how black men have abandoned the Democratic Party. And then when you look at the actual numbers, black men remain the second most loyal voting bloc after black women. And I just think it's an extension of trying to make black men some sort of boogeyman in this discussion. Because when you look at these other constituencies, white women in particular, and of course, Hispanics get a lot of energy. And then we found that, a third of them had voted for Trump. This is after him running his mouth in a racist way against Hispanics for such a long time, and all of his border policy and all that. White women is the other one, that the majority of which voted in majority for Donald Trump, And so I'm not sure why we get off into this conversation about black men, other than the fact that there's nobody black and male sitting on the panel that can point out how ridiculous this is. But this is sort of a theme that keeps coming up. But I bet anything that most of them will go for Warnock. We will see. We'll see. But if I'm wrong, I owe you a steak.
No. I'm not buying you a steak because you're not wrong. Okay. But let me just give you the reality of what I'm looking at, and I'm talking about the long game. All right. And the long game has a few, not a lot, but a few black men who have been put in the position of a Herschel Walker. that have been given the opportunity to run in rural Georgia as a Republican, and some of them are winning. That's a long game approach to me. And that long game has to be blunted by this kind of conversation. So I agree with everything you're saying. But I still say that if 80% of black men voted, and I'm making these numbers up, so I'm not looking at the poll right now. If 80% voted Democratic and this time 75% vote, that's a trend. That's why I was saying to Doc, that's something that somebody is paying attention to. And I think we, particularly in the black press, doing what we're doing now and having this discussion is a blunt for that. It's a, you know what they call a firewall. And I think we need to at least be aware of it before it kind of, in my opinion, gets a little out of hand. Because some of our guys were out there talking and listening to strictly straight up stupidity. And there was nothing they could say about it. I mean, it was sort of like they were dumbfounded. What did we do about this? And I was like, you know what? I know, and I call it, well, put it on advocacy journalism.
Right.
We are advocates. So therefore, we can advocate for the education of our people and talking facts. So I feel comfortable doing that. Now, the publisher may not feel that way, but I certainly do.
Well, we are expecting Al McFarland of Insight News. We are very shortly going to have Rashonda Tate Billingsley from the Defender Network in Texas, and Perry Busby will come in from the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Things are heating up. The Republicans, they have captured 3 House seats so far tonight, but the Senate is still being held right now. The Democrats still have the edge for the Senate. If that goes on that way, it's pretty much what was expected, right?
Well, say that again. Ask that question again.
So the Republicans have picked up so far 3 House seats. There's still a long way to go.
Right.
And Senate is holding steady.
Right.
And if that trend continues throughout the night, it's pretty much what would have been expected, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, some of this, of course, as has been pointed out by Michael Blake and a few others, we're going to be probably looking at this for the next few days, particularly for the House. I mean, even just the fact that, we have to wait for the West Coast, that right there is a game of waiting around till 1 a.m. But yeah, that's a trend so far. But what people are really looking at with the Senate, of course, is Pennsylvania. The Democrats, unfortunately, seem to have given up on North Carolina. So if something were to happen there that was unexpected, that would be quite a victory that they were not expecting, because they really did not help out Sherry Beasley, in my view, in the way they should have. I think Florida comes down to just being a red state, sort of the same experience that Jamie Harrison had in South Carolina, where it's a red state. It's like you can't get around the fact Florida's a red state. Yeah. And of course, Charlie Crist didn't really help Val Demings at all. So there's that problem. So, we'll see. But you here in Georgia, we'll see. You get a record turnout in a place, you should get results that reflect that. So for the Democratic side. So we'll see what happens with Georgia, because I've always been trying to figure out whether or not it's true that Warnock helps Stacey Abrams or vice versa, but we'll see tonight.
Yeah, it'll come down to it. Maryland gets its first Black governor. Wes Moore has been declared the winner, according to the Washington Informer. So the history is made tonight. Rashonda Tate Billingsley and Perry Busby joins us. First, I got to go back to Lauren first, though, on this breaking news from the Washington Informer that the Maryland Wes Moore declared the winner. How big is that, Lauren?
Oh, it's huge. It's historic. You're gonna have a Black governor and a Black attorney general, and it's it's not a race that anybody really talked about, because of course Wes Moore was expected to win, and Maryland being such a blue state. But still, it's a huge deal. It's a big deal. And it's and he's an Phi Alpha guy, so there's gonna be a lot of excitement around that. And it's funny because during CBC week, Phi Alpha had a little event for them that I went to, and it was really cute. But it's a hugely historic deal. It shows you that this idea that Black candidates are always told that you should start with, school board or dog catcher and then work your way up is not quite right. When you build a brand like Wes Moore did and show up, you can pull it off, and he did.
Yeah. Perry down in Florida, things went as expected. As I think Lauren was just saying, it's a red state, right?
Unfortunately, so. I think the election of Barack Obama in 2008 and again in 2012 is somewhat of a misnomer. I am learning as I begin to understand Florida politics, because it when Obama won Florida, Obama had an infrastructure to help win Florida. Unfortunately, when Obama left, that infrastructure left. And that is what you see now playing out in Florida, is really just a lack of infrastructure from the state on down to the county. It looks like Broward, which is the most Democratic county in the state, and I was about to say it has the largest African American district in District 25, the late Congressman Alcee Hastings district, but it is struggling to make 50% turnout. And as elections in Florida goes, if Democrats want to have a chance to win Florida statewide, Broward has to come in at least 65 to 68%. There's just no way around that.
Yeah. Well, and Rashonda out in Texas right now, an upset could be in the making out there. Beto O'Rourke is just 16% of the vote is in, but 58% to 41%. What's been counted? Do you know what's been counted so far? The demographics and anything like that? You unmute, Rashonda.
Sorry about that. Sorry. That's actually a good sign here because our polls are still open here. We have not closed yet because a judge has ordered that our polls stay open until 8 p.m. Central Standard Time because we started the day with some shenanigans.
Okay, tell us about it.
There were all across Harris County, Fort Bend County, voting machines were not working. My day started early with calls from constituents, from people trying to vote. There were people in tears. There are some locations that had 50 voting machines, only 10 of them were working. They discovered that a lot of the machines had not been configured for daylight savings time. So now it's funny that most of these machines are in Black neighborhoods, but voting suppression here is real. But what I do love is that these people stayed vigilant. There are people here that waited all day long. Now, it really wasn't necessary because Harris County, because of Senate Bill 1, you can actually go vote anywhere. And so they could have gone other places, but there were people that were just like, I'm not leaving until my vote is counted. We do have a Black elections administrator, and he is working overtime. That's why he went and fought to get the judge to keep those polls open. And so they're still open here for about another 36 minutes. So Harris County is a Democratic stronghold. So for Beto to be leading and you don't have those Harris County numbers yet, a lot of folks here are keeping their fingers crossed.
That's very interesting because you obviously is there in Texas. I know Lauren knows a lot about this too. Beto, first of all, he's very popular anyway, right? But he campaigned as hard as anyone for this, didn't he?
He did. There was an article recently that said he has spent like 1,700 of the last 2,000 days campaigning. But between him and Abbott, they've spent over $200 million running for this race. And he's really given Greg Abbott a run for the money. But it's really going to depend on those rural areas because that's where Abbott's stronghold is. But Beto, he went after those young people. He did. He's been out there trying to make sure that he talks to the people. So we'll see if it pays off.
And Lauren, what are you expecting, Lauren, when it comes to that particular race?
I think that the Republicans have figured out how to suppress just enough votes in Texas to pull these things out every single time. And I think the Hispanic community is kind of confused. I don't know what they're doing. You would think that they would be voting Democratic, but they don't, and that's one of the biggest problems that Beto has. I just think that I think that Abbott's going to win, frankly. With regard to what is the state house configuration? I'm sure it's Republican led, but remind us in Texas, like what is the are they even close? Are the Democrats even close?
Not even close.
Not even close. I mean, we started the heartbeat bill here.
Right.
It's not even close.
Right.
And we haven't had a Democratic governor since 1994, so it's a long shot. What you were saying about the Hispanics, that just dumbfounds us. But Abbott has really rallied his base around the whole illegal border crossings, and he's aggressively courted those Hispanic voters in South Texas. Right. And that's one of the problems that Beto has.
And Rashonda, excuse me. And Rashonda, to your point, I think Beto has at least tapped into East Texas. I'm a Southeast Texas native. And so what he has done is really tapped into that corridor in the Jasper and the Silsbee, that real rural Black East Texas that many Democrats failed to go because, as you say, they really just give that over. But there are over 2 million African Americans in East Texas. And so it becomes to the Democrats' peril that they don't know where their voters are. But again, Florida is the same way, again, with Texas, because you would say that for all the immigration talk here, that those in the Latino community would see it different. But again, you have the different sectors, because the Cuban community definitely does not see immigration the way as Venezuelans or those from Guatemala see immigration.
Mm. Wow. And Lauren, going back to a race that you brought up first to our attention, the race in North Carolina. We still seeing Beasley holding steady there so far.
Oh gosh, I haven't looked at. I'm afraid to look at it again because I don't want to jinx it and look at it again. Perry. Speaking of Senate races and statewide races, is this the last time? Do you think we're going to see former Governor Chris run for something? I mean, I think with Beto O'Rourke, the feeling is, he's young enough that maybe he gets a cabinet position or just does something else or whatever. Charlie Crist, we keep seeing running and losing lately. So, I mean, what is your prediction for him moving forward? I understand. I do think Florida's a red state, but what do you think about that?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the Florida Democratic Party has some soul searching to do in terms
only in Florida.
Really, but I can say personally, the Democratic Party, as late as June, we were in conversations with them about how could we help further the message, and we were told that they had no message yet. And this was June. But what you saw in the last few weeks here in Florida is indicative of, again, even in the 2018, even with the Gillum advance, you begin to see Democrats move more to the center without even securing their base.
Right.
One of the biggest issues that I had with Congresswoman Dimmons in her initial advertising spot, right. One of the things she said was she made a point about not supporting bad decisions. And of all of the crazy bad decisions that Republicans had on the table, Congresswoman chose to point out defund the police and say that's just stupid. Now, those of us who are politically astute know that she was trying to walk a tightrope. But why would you disenfranchise young voters
Right.
so early in the game when it was so unnecessary?
Well, you know, we saw that in Virginia. We have a key race up here in Northern Virginia with Abigail Spanberger, where she did the exact same thing. I think it was an easier play for Val Demings in terms of she was a police chief. But for Spanberger, she really leaned hard into I hated defund. That was like her first big, you know, media moment in Politico. And I think that is a backfire for the base of the Democratic Party. And, you know, in the case of Abigail Spanberger, Virginia 7, you're talking about a district that's 25% Black and like 32% Hispanic. But I think it's just that when you're not when you're not talking to the base, it's a problem. And the Democrats always get on defense on crime. It is uncanny. So even somebody who's a police chief, you know.
Well, Rashonda, before we let you and Perry go, I want to hear again from you on, you know, as the night get later into the night in Texas, what are you looking at for the Defender network out there? What are you expecting out there? I see we just got a note. The Huffington Post is reporting the first Generation Z Afro-Cuban was elected to Congress today in Florida. Rashonda, what are you expecting?
Well, besides the Beto and Abbott race, where a lot of people are trying to keep hope alive, but I think Lauren is right. It'll be a long shot, but keep hope alive. But I can tell you one race that people are we're just shocked that Texans continue to vote for our lieutenant governor and our attorney general. If you've seen these guys in the news, I can't for the life of me understand how anybody continues to vote for them. But they look like they'll be poised to win their seats. And we have our Harris County attorney here is a young Hispanic, a Latina female. And the Republicans have put up a mighty tight race for her. So that one will be one to watch here. But the Defender will be tackling all of these voting issues. We're watching the races, but tomorrow we want to get to the bottom of these voter suppression tactics. In Beaumont, they actually had, which is right down the road here, a district judge had to file today say that you can't discriminate against Black voters because that's how bad it was getting. They were harassing them at the polls. So we're really going to be tackling that, just to keep shining a light on those voter suppression efforts.
Well, Rashonda Tate Billingsley of the Defender Network, we appreciate you joining us this evening. We always appreciate when you join us. And Perry Busby of the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale. I know Bobby Henry has you working hard down south, so we'll let you get back to it. Thanks, Perry, so much. And let us now bring on Al McFarland, the publisher of Insight News, and Dr. Benjamin Chavis comes back and joins us as well. Al, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Excited on pins and needles here in Minnesota, watching the future take place in front of our very eyes and hoping for the best.
Exactly, Al. So good to see you. And we appreciate all that you do in Minneapolis and across the state of Minnesota. I hear that despite what the pundits have predicted, there has been a large voter turnout of the African American, of the our African brothers and sisters who are now residents of Minnesota. They're voting in record numbers. What do you see on the ground in Minnesota?
Well, that's exactly the case. I think Keith Ellison leading the charge for African American and really voters statewide, progressives, people of conscience, and leading on the record of upholding the law, applying the law. He successfully prosecuted the officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. That was landmark in Minnesota and landmark in the nation, and actually for the world, part of a trend of exacting new accountability from systems that traditionally have minimalized, marginalized, ignored Black life. And Attorney General Keith Ellison brought all of that to a screeching halt by taking charge and leading the state's prosecution of these lawbreakers who were in uniform. Well, the question is there a price to pay? And I tell you, the sense on the ground is that those ultra conservative, pro-police as police used to be, meaning unfettered and unaccountable to anybody besides their union and their own pensions, that genre of thinking is actually attracting upwards of $1 million to throw against Keith Ellison's reelection. So I think you're right, Dr. Ben. Keith has been working hard up to the last minute. We still have about 20 minutes, 24 or 5 minutes before the polls close. I talked to Keith earlier today on our program, and he said he'll be working, getting people to the polls up to the last minute. And for him, that means probably up to 8:30 Central Time, because if somebody's at the poll and is in line, we're going to guarantee that they get a chance to pass their ballot. So I think he has symbolized by his own personal engagement, door knocking, handshaking, inviting, cajoling, instructing people to be engaged and to call their networks, call their families, to send emails, to get everybody out to the polls. And he and other members of our community have been equally aggressive. The Black church, phenomenal, both from the pulpit and in community centers, phenomenal. So I'm hoping that it's going to bear the fruit that we expect, and that's the reelection of Keith Ellison as Minnesota's Attorney General.
Right. You know, the NMPA, we gave Keith Ellison our highest award a month ago, and we really want to salute him and salute you. Again, the national media has not paid much attention to Minnesota. But this is a great voter turnout, and the bus tour that we started actually in Minnesota before going to Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and the other states. So congratulations on a good voter turnout, and I hope all of the people who are listening there in Minnesota will stay on that line. Don't leave that line until they vote.
That's right.
Because if you're in line, you're entitled to still vote in Minnesota.
And you got time to get to the polls too. It's not over till it's over. And so we have been incessant in that message to our community. Stand up, get up, go do what you're supposed to do. Go out and vote, make your voice heard. Your voice, your vote, that's our future. You know,
so
you
I'm very proud of the hashtag 10 million more Black voters. When we first announced it in June, people said, well, Doc, that's a large number. Well, look, you look at all the states, it's going to be more than 10 million more Black voters have gone to the polls in this midterm election.
Well, we've done a great job. You've done a great job. The Black Press of America has done a great job. And I think we're exercising our responsibility to our readers, to our communities, and our responsibility to history. Our job, Dr. Ben, among other things, documenting where we are, where we've been, but also creating a new narratives in which our people discover our pathways to winning. And winning might not be what they call winning. We have to determine and define what winning means to us, but it certainly means winning in these elections, winning votes. And so we don't want to lose track of that. I think that as an organization and as institutions, the Black press, our newspapers, have done a phenomenal job and continue to do so, trumpeting the blasting, blaring, screaming from the mountaintop, the value that redemption and salvation are in our hands, and that we must and we can make the difference in the world that we need and seek. So I think we're doing that. You mentioned the Somali community. We didn't say Somali, but our community is unique because we have a fairly large Somali, East African community. We have a large West African community, primarily Liberians, many of whom are here through temporary residency, some of whom long enough to become citizens. So the Somali community, the West African community, along with the Black community, quadrupling the political power of Black voters in Minnesota.
And the Sudanese, a lot of Sudanese.
And the Sudanese, absolutely. Yes. And so we have, today on my show, I actually included a brother named Waming Mua, who is Hmong. Hmong is Hmong. They were called the Montagnards. They were the secret warriors in Southeast Asia for the CIA. But Minneapolis is one of the huge settlement communities for the Hmong population. The Hmong population is settled in the Black community. And he was on with Bob Bogle from Philadelphia and Jim Washington from Atlanta. And we talked about the changing complexion of the country and the complexity that we have to navigate and that we can navigate, so we continue to identify our shared and our specific interest and move forward, gaining power, taking power, and at the end of the day, resisting the intention of those in power now to keep us out. That's what's not acceptable. We've got to be up, we got to be in.
Polls have closed in 25 states now. And Lauren, Representative Matt Gaetz has won re-election. You want to explain that one?
No, I don't know what that is. Will say that there's been a lot of reporting, obviously, about him allegedly, being prosecuted for something, but it has not happened that he has been indicted. So it is sort of interesting that hasn't happened yet with everything that we've heard, but I'm sure he's in a fairly conservative district.
Yeah.
I think it's Maxwell Frost that is the Generation Z Afro-Cuban.
Yes. We had him on the program as well.
Yeah, and you had him on the program earlier, which is great. And that's a big, that's a really big deal. And Sherry Beasley is still ahead in North Carolina.
Still ahead. Representative Jim Jordan, another Trump denier and supporter, election denier and supporter, has won his race in Ohio's 4th congressional district. So, a couple of Trump wins. It is also expected, Al and of course, Lauren, that the former president is going to announce his bid for the White House as early as next week. Some thought it would have come as soon as tonight, but apparently his people talked about making an announcement tonight to upstage the midterm elections. So we'll hear a whole lot more from Donald J. Trump, that's for sure. But a lot's going on. Fetterman and Oz in Pennsylvania, very early there, only 8% in, but Fetterman has 81% of the vote so far in Pennsylvania. So we'll see. And in Georgia, just to update that one that many are watching, 47% of the vote is in. Senator Raphael Warnock at 51% of the vote and Herschel Walker at 47%. So it's a close race there with 47% counted. So again, something else to keep watching, Dr. Chavis.
Absolutely. We knew it was going to be a long night, and tomorrow's going to be a long day. But the key point is that our vote not only matters, our vote counts, and our vote determines the strategic margin of who wins or who loses in a lot of these races. And so we have to continue. I want to just echo what Al McFarland said. From a Black press perspective, our struggle for freedom, justice, equality, and equity is not a one-day struggle. It's not a one-month struggle. It's not a one-year struggle. Mm-hmm. It is a constant struggle. And what we have to do when these elections happen, we have to refortify, rededicate, revitalize, and keep pushing forward in those places where we win and those places where we don't win. But determining and defining the narrative is our responsibility in the Black press. We not only report the news, but we have to also be an advocate of the dissemination of the right narrative so that the interpretation of the facts are accurate and so that our people are not lulled into some pseudo reality against our own interests. And I'm just so thankful that overwhelming majority of African American voters and voters of African descent are responding to the call of the Black press for 10 million more Black voters.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Chavis, as always. Lauren, before we close out, I know that, again, if anybody keeps their finger on the pulse of these situations, it's you. When we wake up tomorrow, what are you expecting at this point with what we know now?
Oh, that is a hard one to predict. I don't know. I am surprised given the lack of assistance to the Sherry Beasley campaign. She's doing as well as she is, but as Dr. Chavis says, gee, I wonder why that might be the case. It's probably Black voters. I'm going to go ahead and guess that that's why Sherry Beasley is doing well right now. I don't know. I think we still, of course, New York doesn't close until, my home state closes at 9 o'clock, it's like midnight. Like, like we don't find out New York till later. I have a feeling that we're going to see a few surprises maybe in New York on the congressional side. I'll be very surprised if Hochul loses. But that there could be some stuff there in the morning that we see. Obviously, we're not going to get California until really 1 a.m. Eastern. I'm not going to predict because I do think that there's a lot of races out there. I wasn't.
Come on, you've been betting steak dinners with Jim Washington.
I know, but that's easy. That's an easy one to talk about that. I don't know. I'll just say that I'm going to wait for the results. I'm not a big believer in some of the mainstream media things that I've heard so far. But Keith Ellison, I was glad that Al brought up Keith Ellison. I would be surprised if he didn't make it. I think he will, but I don't know. I'll wait to see. I will wait to see and not bet anything. I'll definitely lose if I bet.
Yeah. Well, Lauren Burke, we appreciate you staying with us this evening, and know you got a lot more going on later tonight with Roland and others. So
that's crazy.
So there you go. Thanks so much, Al McFarland. Thank all of our guests, and of course, Dr. Benjamin Chavis, the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Claudette Perry, the executive administrator, all those, of course, Greer, the number one person who puts all this together. Greer,
that's
our
great.
great
That's
producer.
great.
We so thank you. And thank you all for watching. Join us tomorrow morning as we recap things on Let It Be Known, 7:30 a.m. Eastern time. Yep, we'll be right back at it. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you then.